Okay, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on when you're listening to this presentation. My name is Victor, and I'm going to be your anchor for today's training. This is the Cisco ITN version 7, Introduction to Network, Module 10, Basic Router Configurations. Yes, we've gone quite a while. We started from networking today, looked at end device configurations, looked at IP protocols, looked at the Ethernet layer, looked at the data link layer, looked at ARP, address restriction protocol, looked at all of that. And today we are in basic router configurations. Because this is introduction to networking, there's the CCNA level 2 have a whole lot of routing and configuration aspects to it. How do you set up routers? How do you do quite a lot of things? But in ITN, it's very, very foundational, right? Just for us to lead the basics. So I will run through this model. Then in the labs, we are now going to use our actual Cisco switches and routers to run this stuff. We're going to use the packet tracer labs to run them. Okay, so the objectives for this model is basic router configurations. How do you implement initial settings on the router and end device? So the normal thing is when you get a new router or when you get a router that's already been used elsewhere, you need to now start using them. One of the first things you want to do is to give the router a name, right? Give it an IP address, configure some very basic initial stuff. So that's what we want to learn how to do in this particular module. Or we might want to configure the interfaces. So we might want to push some interfaces on maybe a particular section, or we might want to configure our default gateway, right? That guy that we're going to use to connect over to the internet or out of our home network or office network. Okay, so one of the first things you need to know, they are all in the slides. If you're a Cisco Academy student, you have that, or if you're any of our signed up remote students, you have these slides. The slides are just for students, and they also have this content in the Cisco LMS. If you don't have access to the Cisco LMS, you could inbox, you could drop a message, and we will give you steps on how to have access to the learning management system. So for what's it called? For a router, one of the first thing you want to do is to get into the config mode. So you cannot do that in the execution mode. You can only do that in the privilege mode. So all you need to do is that once the router comes up for the first time, at least, you want to do conft, you want to get into the configuration mode or configure terminal. It will give you this hash sign with this config here. Next thing you want to do is to just type hostname. So hostname is the command. Hostname is the name you want to call the router. So if I want to call my router SOUTECH, so I say hostname SOUTECH. If I want to call my router CCNA course or CCNA training, so I say hostname CCNA course. Secure privilege execution mode. So I say if I want to run some stuffs in the execution mode, so I will say enable secret, then I put the password. Then secure user execution mode. I've already explained about the different consoles and the different VTY lines that you have from 0 to 15, which makes it, if you count from 0 to 15, you have 16 lines, right? So you could encrypt your plain passwords this way. Then you could provide legal notifications and save the configuration, right? If you want to add a banner, you just say banner MOTD, you put your message here, right? So this is going to be a message. So anytime somebody wants to get into the config mode, he wants to do stuff, what is going to see is the message that you have added here, right? So these are some basic router configuration. So in the labs, that will be done. So this is an example, right? Command for basic router configuration of R1. So hostname R1. So you could run all of these lines just once. Then before you now save it to the NVRAM, the storage for the router. So you just say hostname R1, enable secret class, line console 0, password Cisco, login. Just run all of these commands the way it is. What's going to happen is that the name of the router will become R1, right? It's the router is going to be encrypted, it's going to be passworded, then the password is going to be Cisco, then it's going to be between the VTY line 0 to 4. Then we're able to also configure run SSH and telnet on it. Then we're going to be able to configure a message, a banner saying warning, unauthorized access is prohibited. Then we exit. Then the last thing that is going to happen is that all of these things that we have set up, we're going to save it to the RAM, right? I think that's all. So if you don't run this last command, everything you've done here, the name of the router, it's not going to save. The password to access the router is not going to save. The default message that when people see when they get to try to get into the password area, this message, they're not going to see that. So it's very important that you run this last command. And of course, you exit the config mode before you run it. Okay, so in the packet tracer, let me see if there's a lab here. This is module 10. Module 10. Yes, build a switch and router network. I think just one lab. I think that should be later on in the course. Okay, so in this packet tracer, you do the following: verify the default router configurations, configure and verify the initial router configurations, then save running config. Yes, so we'll do this, like I said, from the beginning of the course. We're going to do all of the labs separately. Our goal is to give a heads up of the entire concept in the curriculum. Configuring interface. So when you hear the word interface throughout the course, it's that port. So you can say port, you can say interface. If I have a switch now, and that switch has Cisco, we normally use a Cisco 2960 series to do most of the labs we have in the office for students. Let me get a bigger image. This should be a 24 port. Okay. This should be the 24 port, and this is a 48 port. So let's assume I have this. Good. If I have this, for instance, so you see, this is port 1, port 2 is down, depending on how the naming nomenclature is. Port 3 is up, port 4 is down, 5 is up, 6 is down, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So 12, 12, you have 24. So this is a 24 port 2960 switch. So each guy here is called an interface. Each guy here is called a port. So don't forget, if I have this switch now, I'm going to be connecting this switch to other switches. I'm going to be connecting this switch to other networks. How am I going to do that? I'm going to plug an Ethernet cable here, and that is going to now get to somewhere else. The point there is that I will need most of the times to configure each of these interface. So that's what we call interface configuration, right? Because for instance, this is going to be maybe fast Ethernet 001, fast Ethernet 002, fast Ethernet 003, fast Ethernet 004. That way, and maybe this might be my gigabit or the one behind, right? Okay, so you have to configure a router interface, include the following commands. So you say interface type and number. So if it's fast Ethernet 001, whatever, then you describe, give it the description, give it an IP address, then give it an IP version 4 address, then you say no shutdown, right? So when you say no shutdown, it activates that particular interface. Okay, so Look at this topology here. If we need to configure the interface 000, so most switch will have 000, 001, 002, 003, 004 that way, up to let's say 24 port or 48 port or like that, depending on how many ports the router has. Okay, me tiredness there. So I have so let's see what this looks like. So I have a PC here, I have another PC here, I have a switch here, I have a switch here. So in your diagrams, anytime you see arrows going like this, it's a switch. Anytime you see it converging out, in and out this way like a star, it's a router, right? So that's how you identify Cisco switches and router symbols. So the command to configure interface G000 on R1, this is R1. So this is G001. So this is a port. G000. G001 is another port. So we want to configure the interface, just this particular interface, right? So all we just need to do is to get to the config mode. So before you get to this config mode, you have to enter conf T. Once your router boots up, you say conf T, you get to the configuration mode. You now say interface gigabit internet 000. So that means you try to configure that particular port. So just like I explained the other time, it can be just the very first port here. Then next thing you do, you say description link to LAN. So you give it a description. So what's description? Link to LAN. So description is the keyword. Link to LAN is the name you want to give this particular connection. And why? So this is my LAN, everything here. So this is my switch. I can be having a printer here. I might be having another PC here. I can have multiple items here connected to this switch. Everything here is considered as my LAN. That's why I am referring to this link as link to LAN. So you can give it any name that you desire. So you want to also assign an IP address to it. So you say 192.168.10.1, whatever is your choice with this subnet. Then give it an IP version 6 address. Then you say no shutdown and you exit. Once you exit, it does all of the configuration and it's change the state to up. Okay. Same thing if you want to configure 001, that is this other point that gets 002. Same thing, interface gigabit 001, description link to R2. See, you're giving it very descriptive. Then IP address, this IP version 6 address, no shutdown, and you exit. How do you verify interface configuration? So you could just say show IP internet interface brief. So normally it will tell you which of the interfaces, their IP address, if they are up or if they are down, right? So normally you see when you say brief, if you say show IP interface, it will just show all your interfaces. But if you say brief, right, it's just restricted to only the ones that are up and running. Yes, because what will happen is that most of the times you can be having just only 2 systems configured. Every other guy might be down. So if you say show IP interface, it will show up everything. If you say brief, it will show you all of the guys that are up and running. Same thing with this guy. So you see a description of all of the stuff I've been explaining all the while. So you have show IP interface brief, display all the interfaces, their IP address, and their current status, right? Show IP root, same thing. Show interface here. Show IP interfaces here. Show IP version 6 interfaces. You have the explanation there. Okay. Something. Show IP root, same thing with the explanation. Show interface for that particular interface. Show IP interface for this particular interface. You get the details. Show IP version 6 interface for this to give you all the details for that particular one. How do you configure default gateway? So what do you call a default gateway? So a default gateway is used to send out packets to another network. All the while in the modules have been explained the difference between a switch and a router. Like I said, the job of a router is to send me away from my network. Take everything I have there and send it away to another network, or take what I have from another network that's meant for me and bring it in. So that's why this guy is here. This is a LAN network. This is a LAN network. If I'm transmitting data from here to here, the only guy that can do that is a router. This is considered as a network. This is considered as a network. So the default gateway address is generally the router interface address attached to the local network of the host. Okay. So there's a packet tracer lab here. That will be later. So there's a packet tracer lab here also. And that'll be all. So what's the summary of everything we've learned? Before that, there's a practice video that you have in your Cisco LMS that tells you the characteristics of Cisco 4000, 2900 series and 1900 series. So we use the 29 series router. So you see the physical characteristics, how many ports they have, what are the options, do they have PoE, that's power over internet, what kind of storage, what's the max RAM they have, what's their form factor like, and the rest. So please get your Cisco LMS, watch that video. If you have questions, if you have comments, please don't forget to leave that and I'll reply. Okay, so this is a lab. So do the labs later on, how to set up a topology, how to configure the device, and how to display device information. Most of those commands that we've seen will now use the packet tracer or actual switches to run them. So what did we learn in this module, right? You could configure a router, give it some initial settings by just doing what? Give it a name, get to secure the execution mode, secure the telnet on the SSH, that is remote access, secure all the passwords, provide legal information, stuff like, please, this is a secured zone. And then, of course, you save your configuration. If you're a test for your exam, the no shutdown command activates the interface. That's what it does, right? So you should be familiar with all the other ones we've explained: interface brief, show IP route, show interface, show IP interface, and the rest. Okay, so what are some new things you've learned in this module? You've learned the interface brief, for IP version 4, IP version 6. So in IP version 4, you're not seeing IP version 4 written. So by default, this is considered IP version 4. This is IP version 6. This is considered IP version 4. This is IP version 6, right? That way. Default, this is considered IP version 4. This is IP version 6. Okay, thank you very much. See you in the next module. Don't forget to like, subscribe. See you in module 11.